We are living in complicated times. Very disturbing images on the news every night. People out in the street protesting, trying to raise awareness for Black Lives Matter. And today we're going to talk to Sandee Kastrul, who's a Chicago activist and has worked to serve underserved communities for many years. So stay tuned. Welcome back to another FutureTech Video Podcast. Today, we have with us Sandee Kastrul. I've known Sandee since 2000 when I was first introduced to I.c.stars. Sandee is a force of nature, and she seems to be at the center of tech in Chicago and around the country as she expands into new markets. Sandee Kastrul is president and co-founder of I.c.stars, an innovative, nonprofit leadership and technology training program founded in 1999 to prepare inner-city adults for technology careers and community leadership. Sandee has been an educator, an activist, a diversity trainer, an educational consultant, and a performing artist. For the past 20 years, she has been training people from underserved communities to be technology leaders. Welcome, Sandee.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thanks. And as usual, I have Sandee Patel with me.
Hey, Chris. Hey, Sandee. Sandee, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
So, Sandee, this is a really, we live in interesting times right now, and we've seen an unprecedented level of protests, all over the country and the world, quite frankly, focusing on Black Lives Matter. It's an important movement, and I think, you're somebody who could bring us some interesting perspective on what's going on out there and what do we need to do to make, real substantive changes here. So I just wanted to see if I could get, your take on what's happening in the world right now.
Well, yeah, and I think that we're at a really pivotal moment in history. So think about it like we are just coming out of a global pandemic, or we're right in the middle of a
right
global
in the middle
pandemic.
Of it, yeah.
And so we've all been cooped up in our homes. And when I say that, we sort of nod. Yeah, we've all been cooped up. But the truth is we haven't all been cooped up.
Yeah.
Some of us are having to work on the front lines. Some of us are having to do our minimum wage jobs. Some of us are putting ourselves in danger every single day to go out and make sure that we have what we need as a country, as a society.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, those are the folks making the lowest amount, and they're living at the highest risk threshold. And so then fast forward, to another killing of a Black person. We hear another time, I can't breathe. And this time is a little bit different because we saw the face of the murder.
Mm-hmm.
We saw the policeman's face looking at us. And I think it terrified everyone to see that face. But what's happening all throughout communities across our country, our Black folks are saying, this is nothing new.
Mm-hmm.
We've been experiencing this for decades upon decades, like since slavery.
Right.
We can't breathe. There's someone's knee in our neck. But what I see is an incredible sense of hope. Because I think that this is the moment in time where all of us have to choose. Do we believe that Black lives matter? Right? That and by matter, I mean, and I think what everybody's saying is have the right to live.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have the right to live? And by golly, if that isn't answered yes, I don't know who these monsters are who say no. And so, I mean, and there we are. And so things are changing, like everybody is standing up for it, even in a pandemic. and saying things have got to change. And we're seeing multi-generation, racial, everybody kind of standing up in this moment in time to say yes.
So the thing you say, this time seems different, right? And I do feel like we have seen video of the police, and we've been up close before to like Laquan McDonald and all those. I feel like we see these things happen, and we have a moment of outrage. But this one, I agree with you, does seem to have a different tone to it, and I think maybe everything's kind of come to a head here. But I think one of the things that's different about this, from the perspective of sort of a white suburban male here, right, is the incredible brutality which these protests were met with. And to me, it makes me feel really bad, because I didn't realize how bad it was. I being aware of things, I knew there was a lot wrong, but all of a sudden, now we're seeing images of, it's not just, a few bad apples, it's hundreds, it's whole units of police force that are coming in and hitting people with pepper sprays and knocking them down and beating them with batons. I mean, it was really, really eye-opening for me. And I feel sort of embarrassed to even admit that was eye-opening when it probably should have been something I knew. But, you feel like maybe that's a little bit of the difference there too?
Yeah. But we also know that Black families everywhere give their Black children the talk. And part of that talk is how to deal with the police. Yeah. And so we're growing up in an environment where we don't have any belief that the police are here to protect us. The police are someone to be feared.
Yeah.
What's happening now, though, is that we are seeing it firsthand. So to your point, I think we've always been fed the narrative that there are a few bad apples. And unfortunately, this is happening and this is happening. And then we back up and say, well, what was that person doing to deserve it? And then we make it all about the victim. And again, I think this time we saw the face. We saw that look directly into the camera, and it terrified us. The other thing that I believe is different is, years ago, I heard Jimmy Carter give a talk about sex trafficking. Mm-hmm. And he came, and it was a TED talk, and it was a curated session of all women CEOs and VCs. And we were the entire audience. There were a lot of great speakers. And Jimmy Carter was the only man speaking that day. And he got up in front of everyone and he said, I want you to go home and tell your husbands that they need to care about sex trafficking. And we all were just like, what? Like our heads blew back. Like, how in the world is he going to tell us to get our husbands to care?
Yeah.
And so we were outraged, what is this? And then he substantiated it by saying, look, women are 50% of the population. And until we get men to care about sex trafficking, it will be a woman's issue. Mm-hmm. And it'll never go beyond that.
Yeah.
It's not until we all care that something changes.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what's happening now. I think it went beyond being a Black issue or a Black movement to it being like all of us.
Yeah.
We are standing in the center of care. And even those people who, I don't know, are disagreeing or think that Black lives don't matter, they're stepping into a place of care as well. Mm-hmm. Whether they're opposed to it or not, it is everybody cares right now.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a really interesting point, because, we've made this a Black issue, but this is a white problem, right? Yeah. Unless white people get on board to solve this problem, it's not going to get solved, right? We are the source of the problem. So yeah, that's an incredibly powerful perspective that Jimmy Carter had on that. So So how do we move forward from here? I mean, like I know you obviously have a lot of great ideas about how to change society because you've been doing it for quite some time. I mean, what do you think is the path forward here?
Well, I think as business people, there are three things. I think it means hiring Black people, and just so simply put,
Hmm.
hiring Black folks, hiring Black folks at all levels within your organization. So not just entry level, absolutely entry level, but then managers, and then leadership in the boardroom. That until we're seeing Black people in roles across the organization, we can't have equality. Um, and then I think the second thing is to develop all of our people. So ERG groups are great and all of these things. We have to invest in the development of people, in training, whether that is hard skills training, whether it's diversity training, leadership development, but bring back that blueprint where we're investing in our people's growth because it makes all of us better. And then and then the third thing is investing in Black businesses and Black talent, like all of those ways that we're saying, I see you, and I see how this investment is good for our business. Um, I think that in terms of the bigger picture, like what can we all do in our society as members, as white people, I'll tell you honestly, I think what you can do is talk about it.
Hmm.
Is talk about it and educate folks when you hear something wrong, and that it's time for a re-education. And by this I mean that you know as people of color, we have to learn the unwritten rules of the dominant culture.
Hmm.
We have to do that not only to survive, but to thrive. Like as soon as we can figure out what those rules are and we can participate in a system. And that what that does is it makes us resilient. It makes
Hmm.
us great decoders. It also made us have to understand how you think as white people and what your rules are and what you value, what you don't value, what you like, what you dislike, all of these things. The hard thing is that you've never had to do that.
Right.
So as white people, it means that understanding your privilege is having to learn about what you don't need to know. And that's really hard. Like that's what privilege is that it's the freedom to move about with only looking at one perspective.
Yeah.
And here's what we know. One perspective in business means you fail. One
Yeah.
perspective not understanding how other people think and make decisions and innovate means your business fails. And so, I think what we can do is take a step back, look at our own privilege, learn from that and from others, and have those really hard conversations. And that when we hear somebody saying something that just doesn't smell right, that's not right, we know that is, a mischaracterization, or it's just simply wrong, to say, hey, that's wrong. And not to sit by and let people say things that are untrue or are damaging to other people. To
Yeah.
stand up.
I think, one of the things that's come out of this is the concept that it's not enough to be not racist. You have to be actively anti-racist, right?
Yeah.
And you have to confront people. And I think one of the challenges I see with that right now is that the form that seems to be taking right now is sort of canceling, the cancel culture piece of it, right? And I worry about the longevity of that, like how long that kind of perspective can go on without, the message getting lost somehow in there. I think this is sort of, it's not a sprint. It's sort of a marathon here.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I just worry about that just sort of getting lost somewhere along the way.
Yeah, that's such a good point. So the metaphor that I used when we were talking to the I.c.stars folks was that we are in a global pandemic right now and the whole world is grounded. We've all been grounded, just like we were grounded as kids. You go to your room. We are sitting in our rooms and we're pissed, right? Like that thing happened when you get grounded, you stomped around in your room, you cried, you cussed under your breath, and that when you couldn't express anger any longer, you did something, an activity. For me, it was singing into my hairbrush, like, but we all had that activity, that one thing that we did. Maybe it was playing our video game, but that activity reminded us of who we are. So we moved from anger to standing firmly in who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And then the magic part happens is that when we remember who we are, or in this case, when we remember our humanity, then we go from being grounded to grounding. It grounds us. And so we have this incredible opportunity right now as a planet to be grounded. We are eating dinner with our families. We are remembering who we are. We are putting up with our kids. We are going back to our funny things that are our hobbies. Like there was never enough time. We never saw our partners. And now all of a sudden, not only do we see them, we're living with them.
Yeah.
And it's changing our whole perspective. And it's grounding us in who we are. And so that when we show up again to be citizens of this planet, we're showing up differently. And just to prove how smart this is that Shakespeare wrote King Lear under quarantine. Some would argue his best writing ever happened in that grounding.
Yeah, well, and Sir Isaac Newton came up with calculus while he was in quarantine.
And who doesn't love calculus? Look, gifts just keep on giving.
Yeah, right.
I think this is when we say nerd alert.
So, I mean, that's a really interesting perspective on it all. I think one of the things that you had when we were talking before that you had mentioned is that you take a real, being sort of a technology nerd like the rest of us here. You take a very systems-based approach to addressing issues. I mean, could you talk a little bit about your thoughts around that?
Sure. So, when we founded I.c.stars, this was the late 90s, right? So there were .coms everywhere. Everybody had those fancy chairs. There was a plethora of resources. But what I could see was that, there were just white guys in their 20s, having IPO and like it was crazy. It was mayhem. And there was a shortage of technology workers, right? Like, because every business needed a website.
Right.
And there weren't enough web developers. So if you could do HTML, you could make like $80,000, like the world was yours. It was a crazy time. And so I thought, oh boy, this is a great place to train people. And, who better to train than inner city young adults? Back to that idea of the world has been flat. How do we broaden our perspective?
Yeah.
It wouldn't be out of charity, it would be out of opportunity for business. Because by hiring these folks who were incredibly resilient and talented and had like drive and creativity and out of the box thinking and chutzpah and all of that, this was a great source of talent that could be trained up. But the thing that I love about technology, geek alert, is it's creative, right? It shouldn't matter what you look like.
Yeah.
And that there's process and methodology embedded in doing technology work. At the end of the day, technology is about solving problems and building solutions.
Yeah.
So the big question for us was, well, wait a minute, what if we taught folks technology, got folks great jobs in IT, but then used that same systems thinking that we do, like doing technology work, and applied that to community leadership? So what if we were the ones to solve the problems and build the solutions in the communities that we come from? And rather than just teaching one thing, one hard skill, where our folks would, get that skill, go to the boot camp, go get their jobs and never come back, what if we made it not linear but circular and said, how do you give back? Okay, so now how do you take all of that? How do you take that systems thinking mindset that means instead of it being about me and you or this interpersonal way, or even like my community versus your community, we look at it from a systems perspective. Where's the system broken and how can we fix it?
Mm.
And that's something that you learn doing technology because that's what it is, right? Like it's building systems.
Yeah, well, there's a lot there. One of the things I think that's interesting about this time too is that we've had this big uptick in work from home, right? And do you feel like this is that's going to change the dynamic a little bit because they're not sort of location restricted anymore?
It's a good question, and so I think there's almost two answers to this. One is the answer to now, and the answer to later. And so right now, here's what I'm seeing. The I.c.stars folks who work 12 hours a day, it's all project-based learning. You're solving a business problem using technology, building an app. And for the first time, they have the ability to work from home.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're seeing is that people are working in their homes and their families are like, what are you doing in your room for 12 hours? That whole piece. But then the hard part is that there's all this guilt because they're watching their family go out to work every day and putting themselves at risk by being in the world. And God forbid they do come back with the virus, there's all of this mayhem that happens when you live in a place that doesn't have the proper way to isolate or socially distance yourself from other people. And so it's a bit of a mess. And it's a bit of an emotional mess of, I feel guilty that I can do this, that I'm afforded this luxury of being able to work at home while my family does not have it. But I think to the second part that you really kind of opened up this notion of location, right? So, the real definition of a ghetto is an area that is cut off from the economic center of the city.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we say, well, gosh, I.c.stars is in downtown Chicago or downtown Milwaukee or downtown Columbus, and it's hard for people to get there from the community. Why don't you just locate yourself in the community? And my answer is always no. I think it's really important that we learn how to come into the economic center and to move through spaces. And so while I think work from home is a convenience and it is making us more productive in so many ways, and it's delightful just having your slippers on while you're in a board meeting, I think that the challenge then becomes, how do we make sure that everybody has the right infrastructure? How do we make sure that everybody has the right resources? And how do we continue as we're working with people to move from one place to another, to see themselves moving from one place to another? How do we maintain that in a work from home world where there are so many different challenges and we're not getting out of our comfort zone? Because that's what change is, right? Change is uncomfortable, and that's how we know it's working.
Yeah, well, you bring up an interesting point that I didn't think clearly enough about, but the fact that sort of this lack of infrastructure can be isolating as well, and even though there's sort of the democratization of work, from a work from home perspective, there's also the lack of infrastructure to participate.
Yeah,
and that's a frightening challenge, I think.
Yeah. So here's a story that I'm not so proud of, but it's a good learning story. So, every day at I.c.stars we have high tea, and we have a different business leader come and share their story over a pot of tea, and it's just a wonderful way to share stories, to imagine the future, and to learn from all these great executives. And so of course we've brought tea online. And so we're having virtual teas every day, and it's really lovely. It's working. The team did a great job of transporting so much of our rich curriculum online. So I was going to tea the other day, and I noticed there were a few tiles of people's without their faces, right? There was the letter or whatever you see. And I get pissed off, like, how dare you not show your face? Like, that is the rudest thing ever. And so I like get on the chat and I say to the people, either show your face or get out. And, and then there's all this scrambling and you see like their lights going on and off or whatever. But the one person just is sitting there in the corner. And so I start to think, well, gosh, is she like just pouring herself a glass of wine or something? Like, why isn't she didn't hear what I said. And so I type even faster, get out or show your face. Well, it turns out that everybody was paying attention. It was just an internet thing. And so they were calling in on their phones, and they were having major connectivity issues, and they were desperately trying, and they had to make the choice. Do I return a chat to Sandee and say, internet troubles, or do I try to solve the problem? Well, we're going to gamble. So one person did, I'm going to get off and try again. And the other person tried to solve the problem. And that all of these things, like, think about all that wasted time.
Yeah.
Like, I'm thinking that this person's brand is that they're lazy, they're rude, they're whatever. And while they're on the other side trying, and we never even see it.
Yeah.
I think, wow, that's just such a good example of kind of what happens when we don't all start from the same place.
Yeah. So Sandee, the same thing happened to Chris and I. So COVID happened. Everyone's working from home. Our bandwidth is being compromised. People are stealing, kids are on, the internet, the whole family is. And so we do these podcasts and Chris would be like, there's a little delay in you. You're kind of throwing off the whole conversation. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. I think my internet's pretty good, right? 3 weeks of calling Comcast and troubleshooting, Chris troubleshooting with me, we're trying to figure it out. He went out and got his own internet. He got an upgrade and got his own dedicated line. I had to upgrade. I had to spend more money. But to your point, not everybody has that opportunity, right? And so for us, we were able to pivot and change and spend some money because it was important to us. But not everybody would have that opportunity, which really sucks because right now, this is a commodity that everyone really, really needs,
Yeah. Thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, click that like button, hit that subscribe button because that helps a tremendous amount. And click on that bell icon if you want notifications. This is going to be a two-parter, so click on that bell icon to get notified of part 2 when we post it. And I will see you in the next video.